Wait, Dragnix covering a non-indie game? Yeah, I know, it's been a while. But not only do I think it's important to review one non-indie game every now and again to keep perspective on things, I was intrigued even more by the conversation that has been developing around Silent Hill F. It seems to have some division, despite some positive buzz from the initial reviews. And well, me? I love myself some good old survival horror. Silent Hill F released on September 25th, 2025 for the price of $69.99 and is available on the PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, and the PC, specifically Steam. Now for the purposes of this review, I played the game on the PS5. Set in the 1960s in Japan, Silent Hill is not in its normal location, but the vibes of horror, monsters of one's own making, and self-reflection still carry over to this new title by Neo Bards Entertainment, who, while having been support on other titles such as Marvel's Avengers and the Resident Evil series, introduces the studio to the gaming public with its very own first game. The question is, did they succeed in capturing the essence of this series? Well, no better time than the present to find that out. The core of the Silent Hill experience, and what makes the franchise stick with players throughout the years, is the story, so we'll start there. You play as Hiniko, a young, seemingly high school girl in a remote village in Japan called Ibisogaoka, and I hope I pronounced that right. She lives there with her parents, but has her friends Sakako, Rinko, and her Space Wars partner Shu to keep her company. But after getting together one day with her friends, a mysterious fog envelops the town and spawns horrors left and right. So, Hiniko must fight to survive while trying to discover what's truly going on here and what this new world has to do with Hiniko herself. Now, for the spoiler-free section of this review, for the story at least, I'm going to be as generic as possible with connecting this game's story to other stories. So, while they may not be one-to-one comparisons in that, know that I'm referencing them more so for the feelings they invoke more than anything. See, to me, Silent Hill F is definitely a story that spoiling even some of the more basic elements of it would be a disservice, because part of the appeal here is taking in information as it comes and trying to picture what it all means in the big picture, almost like a detective with their own story. For Silent Hill F, those who are familiar with horror stories similar to movies like Ringu, Hellraiser, and of all things Cat in the Hat, will know the formula at work here. There's horrors beyond comprehension plaguing the town, but there's a direct connection to those involved and what awaits them, with hidden symbolism throughout the story. This symbolism, while making a lot more sense down the road, can be blatant at times, but it's done in a way where it can be interpreted in multiple ways even through that blatantness. And without additional information, you may not actually truly understand what it's representing, and that's part of the fun for me. The baseline story is intriguing, however, despite the fact the game, in my opinion, starts off pretty shaky. The core characters that are established early in Shu, Rinko, Hinako, and others is weak, and actually starts you on a weird note. These friends coming together and yet something immediately seeing off in their interactions. You question the group and their dynamics, especially as the horror elements hit way sooner than I expected. Compared to others in the genre, this game just throws you in the deep end and doesn't establish character behavior and traits before the chaos hits. Hell, thinking about other Silent Hills in the series, they establish those characters, those side and, main characters a lot more than they do here. But that's part of the brilliance of this writing, in my opinion, and its purposeful structure actually somewhat leads to some of the interesting takes about certain parts of the story on the internet. to the point where I've seen people blast certain parts and clips for being bad, and characters for being horribly designed. Rinko is a prime example. The behavior of Rinko is heavily focused on in conjunction with Shu and Hinako, and at first, you're wondering why both of them don't just haul off and literally smack Rinko upside the head. It's almost unbelievable that they would put up with her. She legitimately will probably piss off players with her attitude, being a semi-villain of sorts despite the fact that there's giant creatures around you. But as the game goes on, you start to see the complexity of her character, and giving more reasons to exactly where her weaknesses and her insecurities play out, if you choose to see them. Your perception of her when you start to learn about some of the events of the game will make the best players go back and rewatch certain elements with that in mind, and it will start to piecemeal their behavior and reasoning a lot more clearly. Silent Hill F, in almost every named character, may be one of the best in the genre, and especially when replaying, to understand every little decision beyond the branching endings affecting these characters, because every character has dense and complex interactions, and yet is also able to allow people to have multiple takes on those characters that I find valid. There's a lot of interpretation that goes into this story, and to me, that's one of the best stories that you can have, especially when horror is involved. The game also does a very good job of keeping a pace that reveals major and minor things in a brisk, yet purposeful, and yet adjustable place. Those who go and try to find more hints via in-game lore and just looking at the environment and the storytelling of placement of items will be rewarded. In fact, some of the most satisfying sections of the game are these sections, because they really flesh out the world outside our main characters, but feed into that detective element where you're trying to figure out exactly what's going on. A fantastic example of this is this doctor's house, where you learn more about some of the items and the red flowers that you come across. And it's such a nice, small, contained experience, doing a lot of environmental storytelling and just natural progression, even in its 5-minute side mission. To that point, I really wish there were a lot more of these experiences in the game. There are several, but they were usually so good that I was waiting for the next one to drop. And why I say adjustable was that sometimes these sections are almost necessary to understand anything going on in the plot of other horror games. But I don't think that's the case here. Those who go more on the main path will still get a reasonable story out of it. Granted, they may not see the nuance of certain elements, but in that same light, the possibilities are still numerous and allowed for imagination that those players will still probably enjoy it, especially those who love detective stories. With that said, I do want to warn about something here. I've seen several people say things along the lines of, "Oh, I'll just watch the story cutscenes to understand the story," or "I don't need to play through the game again, I'll just see the other endings on YouTube." I would advise strongly against that if you're a horror fan. Part of why I think Silent F's story is so brilliant is that even with its subject matter and what could be considered a focus on specific gender, race, occupational elements, the game is able to break down those elements enough that it's relatable on several fronts, as long as you keep an open mind about things. Because at its core, it's about the control that one has over one's surroundings and actions. And no matter who you are, that's something that is relatable to all of us because we're human. That's what makes us human. And the complexities about being in society and having expectations and where we come from. If you see this plot and immediately dismiss it because it doesn't uphold to your ideals or thoughts, I'd advise you to look a little deeper. Because quite frankly, I don't think you are giving it the attention that you really need to and are making assumptions that you shouldn't be making. And yes, this is a very specific shot against certain people who reviewed this game that are not worth specifically mentioning in this review. It also helps that the game does a great job of making you feel the impact of the events throughout the game, keeping a through line through not only the story beats, but its visual presentation. A great example of this is Himiko's uniform throughout the game, which is more than exactly, some parts of her clothes are ripped off. It's where they are ripped, what those missing segments mean, and just the sheer density of how beat up it looks towards the end of the game. It's clear that Himiko has been through shit, but those players who really look closely will be rewarded in what it actually means. And this goes double on the second and third playthrough. If you go out of your way and look at things or interact with things, you'll get some extra information that really is fantastic. One of the final things I want to say in the non-spoiler section of the review is that if you are a person who loves Japanese culture, and especially Silent Hill, but other elements that are tangentially related to it, horror, just gaming in general, you will find a lot of little things that you will really appreciate here. And I'm talking about at the lowest level. Yes, some of them are available on the second and third playthrough, but some of them are available in the first playthrough and are very, very specific. For example, look at the sheet music when you get into the school. You'll see something, if you're a music person or somebody who goes and looks it up, of what that means, and it's just sort of that clever, oh, that's cute. Oh, wait, how much did I miss in the back end? Oh, I need to go and play this game again. I want to end this non-spoiler story section of the review with a real affirmation of the job that the main writer of Silent Hill F, Rikushi07, was able to bring to this franchise. He's known for some of the best horror visual novels in the industry, especially from the Japanese perspective. In particular, the When They Cry series, which has anime adaptations, and I would advise you to go read the visual novels or watch that. He approached this story in a way that really gave the spirit of Silent Hill in horrors created from one's own psyche and the symbolism behind that, and masterfully created a story that was blended into Japanese culture, but relatability in that horror as well. He didn't let the definition of what the series was and force it into his own story. He blended those elements into a new interpretation that stands as a template of how to adapt the franchise into new situations and locations while still being itself. He was able to make a Silent Hill story without it necessarily needing to be a Silent Hill story. And that, I think, is a absolute masterclass in terms of writing. Hell, I would also argue that this is one of his best works, even with his whole pedigree, based on how dense this length was in terms of symbolism, in terms of the story, with the work that he's done. And that is saying something. So, well done, Rikushi07 and whoever worked with him. Well done. At this point, I do think I need to discuss what I would consider reasonable spoilers for the game. And I don't think I can be cleverly talking around it like I've done in other reviews with massive story spoilers, considering the type of game Silent Hill F is. So, if you don't want anything spoiled, skip to this timestamp on the screen, and in the description below to the gameplay section, and I'll give those specifically not active on the video or watching a different screen a little time to change over before I start. Because that's the nice thing to do. This is me stalling for time as I let you do that. Okay? Okay, time to dig in. Hinika's story about a young girl dealing with the expectation and obligations of an arranged marriage while still trying to keep her independence is one that I find refreshing and yet pointed at how it's approached. The thing is, it would be very easy for the story to take the side of independence over tradition or responsibility and go completely one direction with it. And those who may have played the first run through the game or just watched it may be wondering what I'm talking about here, because it's clear that there is an initial preference, especially with the highlighting of things like the loss of one's personality through the ritual that replaces parts of Hinako. It's one of the biggest red flags when it comes to abusers, when you isolate a person from their old self, whether that be their family or their wants or dreams or who they are as a person. They mold them into what they want them to be. But even in that first run, there are signs that things aren't entirely cut and dry. And where I find the best representation of this, and why I think that Silent Hill F's story really succeeds in the big picture, is the Fox Mask character himself. Let's be clear, in my mind, Fox Mask on the surface isn't inherently bad. He's always lending a hand, is always making sure that the otherworld Hinako is rested and not overdoing herself, and seems like an ideal partner on the surface. But in that same breath, the core element of him changing otherworld Hinako to match him and his ideals is inherently a scary one, and goes against an idea of finding a partner, at least at my core. If you're changing someone that much, is it them anymore? It forces one to give up oneself, and is coinciding with otherworld Hinako almost lost in a hypnotic-like state to please him towards the end of the game. This parallels a lot of abusers over the years, and this naturally makes you question his intentions. But if you stop and watch the scenes and his interactions and the way that the character is presented, in my mind at least, there's always this underlying caution from him, especially with the way that he moves and the way that he approaches Hinako, that makes you wonder if he's truly on board with what's going on, almost like if he's wondering if he's really hurting her in the process. With the way the story and the true ending works out, it is clear that he does care for Hinako. There is love there, but he's also in a weird place himself, especially with the sub-story about being an heir to a godhood. It's clear that he doesn't entirely know who he is, and that's presented in the true ending where he literally writes a letter saying he needs to find himself. But in this true ending, I like the fact that Hinako doesn't directly reject him. She understands that there is a layer to him that obviously cares for her, and to an extent she cares for him, but she doesn't want to just agree to it. She wants to understand and grow as a person and give him a true answer, which I think is very mature for someone of her age. And so her not necessarily rejecting it outright shows that, she's got herself under control. She isn't bowing down to others, but she isn't necessarily rejecting them either. She's willing to listen, but be herself in the process. Hence why the two parts of her come together and, sort of make up. I love the symbolism all over the place in terms of this game. Using the fox mask, for example. The fox in Japanese culture, the kitsune in particular, has two sides to him. A protector side and a trickster side, which both show up here in terms of this story. You don't know whether to trust him because it could be a protector, but it could also be a trickster, and it could be both. In other spoilers, I am a little bit more torn on the red capsule element. Obviously, the reveal of the red capsules being what causes delusions that lead to the massacre in the first run adds a layer to not only the gameplay, but it adds a lot of additional complexity with the fact that Shu is sort of the reason behind it. At first glance, it's a very shocking revelation that the one male character that seemed to be relatable and understanding of Himiko ends up doing something that causes so much pain, or at least the ones in the real world per se. It starts to bring up the discussion of the controlling nature of men, especially in Japanese culture, at the core of the story. But what adds even more complexity is that Shu inherently did want to protect Himiko as a friend and partner, and that is good at its core. But, like a lot of other things corrupted in this story, it ends up turning his want to protect and to love her into something a lot more twisted. It plays off his inexperience of his apothecary, like, on-the-job learning, something Mao Mao would never do, which mirrors the whole being free and youthful portions of the themes, and what devastating consequences it could have. On the surface, it looks 100% perfect for the story, and the whole idea of Himiko getting tension headaches, the fact that the marriage would probably cause tension headaches, and the keeping on needing the red capsules in an allegory of drug dependency and toxic relationships is a great theme on the surface, and I think it will work for 99% of people. So why am I having trouble with it? Well, it's sort of how it goes from 10 to 100 in intensity in the story element. I'll mention this in the gameplay section of the review, but I do really think there were a section of the game that was cut out due to budget, and while the Otherworld Himiko does a little better job showing the gradual changing of her character, I was expecting more smaller outbursts from Himiko with the unstable nature of the medication causing the eventual psychotic break towards the last end of the game, in the first run at least. Like, I expected her to actually lash out a little bit at Rinko with some of her statements. I mean, they were pointed, and it's something that it would be understandable if she reacted to, showing her instability. But it never really gets to that point. In fact, by the time she's obviously going through the break, no one is really around to react to it. Now, this could be symbolism for the fact that it came out of nowhere. This whole, massacre at the end, no one could have seen it coming. There are some parallels there. But for me, this is coming from someone who is on psychiatric medication himself for psychiatric elements. I'm ADD, OCD, and I have seen those in my life who are on medications like this, and how not taking them or taking them a little bit too much at times can cause massive problems. So it hits a little close to home for me, and maybe that's why I'm so iffy on it, because it does need a little bit more nuance, at least in my opinion. As for the holy element of the game, and ties with the whole fox spirit and the fate of the town itself, I do like how it's incorporated and yet really sits in the background of the game until the second playthrough. It does feel very Silent Hill with the whole deity and sacrifice symbolism, but I do like how they grounded it in a little realism with the arsenic element. You could just sort of say they were going crazy from the arsenic, but at the same time, it does feel like there was a natural reason for everything to happen in terms of the physical world. The thing I really do appreciate is that it allowed us to focus on Hidiko's breakdown and her specific story and the characters itself in the first run without it being such a main plot point. Because if it was, you would be like, oh, that's causing all the issues. No, the issues are at the core of Hiniko and how she is reacting to everything around her. It just sort of pushes it along. When it's revealed more so in the second and third and fourth playthrough, it allows for additional context and reasoning that control the elements and actions of the Fox Mask and the future that really emphasized fate and destiny elements of the story. Finally, I want to emphasize in the spoiler section that the world was created was so good and intriguing that I would not be amiss to see more added to it in DLC or an eventual Master Edition. I'd love to see more about Hinako's sister, about those parents now that the story is done, maybe some of the horrors they went through, maybe they had their own Silent Hill-F story of sorts and horrors that they experienced. And maybe horrors that the doctor in the story went through. Similar to some of the RE7 DLC. I know, this story is great as it is, and I'm just asking for more, but it's the world that's created here that has so much potential that I think coming back to it would be fantastic. Okay, now that I've discussed the story to absolute death, let's move on to what is probably the more divisive part of the game, the gameplay. Early impressions before the game came out had people comparing it to Souls-like games. And while there are elements that obviously parallel that genre, to say it's a Souls-like would be very, very misleading, but not entirely inaccurate. So, the main gameplay loop has you working your way through an area, exploring, picking up items, while dodging and attacking horrors around you. You can divide the gameplay into combat and puzzle exploration, and I'll start with the combat. This combat focuses on melee with weapons such as steel pipes and kitchen knives, with a targeting system that allows you to keep focus and change between what could be 1 to 3 enemies typically. 1 or 2 normally, but if you get yourself into a situation, it could be 3 or more. You have a light attack as well as a heavy attack, and it's very dependent on your weapon for the effective range of it. You can get combos with timely pressing of the attacks, but the big key to this combat is that you have stamina, which is used not only for the attacks themselves, but for dodging, which is vital for, well, keeping your vitals up. Your dodge has a reasonable range, but does take a chunk of your stamina as well, and that could be crucial if you're overzealous in using it, keeping you in a situation where you don't have any stamina to dodge. It should be noted, however, that perfect dodges will refill the stamina meter, allowing skilled players to take advantage and get some hits in. There's also a parry mechanic that you can use, which will highlight the enemy in a multicolored outline, which will automatically hit them if you time it right and stun them, which means that you could also get multiple hits in. However, the timing is very specific, and can usually be noted even before the highlight comes up with the animation that's being used if you recognize it. However, there's also an easier way, and that's with the sanity mechanic. I think of sanity as more of a focus of sorts. If you hold the focus on an enemy long enough so that it circles around in the corner here by holding a button, you'll do a strong attack that can interrupt the monster, stun them, and allow you to do more damage in the follow-up. Furthermore, it slows things down as you focus, so that interrupt prompt that I told you about before is a lot more seeable. Granted, that time slowdown also slows you down movement-wise, so even if you fully charge the meter, you may have to keep holding it to get into the right specific area for it, as if you let go, you'll lose the focus. And sanity also has a maximum value that may have to be restored at shrines or with items, because if you take damage at the wrong time, or honestly, I'm not exactly sure every prompt of when sanity's max goes down, you will only regain up to that sanity until you cleanse of sorts. I think that one of the first things to grasp when analyzing this gameplay is that this is designed not to be a Resident Evil 4 or an action horror game, but a horror game where the protagonist has limits but isn't necessarily a weakling. The stamina system, for example, may feel restrictive to a lot of players, but it is to force the players into situations where, yes, being overzealous and attacking at the wrong time will have consequences. You're able to fight back, but not with overwhelming force, and that's especially true with multiple enemies at the same time. If you rush into things, you'll be handed your own butt on a silver platter. Even being a veteran of the genre, I felt that struggle on the hard difficulty, as there were times I was without stamina and unable to dodge an attack. And I want to say a good amount of those situations were my fault. A lot of your countering of these enemies has to do with your observational awareness. Seeing animations coming in order to get into the right position was absolutely crucial here, especially to get multiple hits on them. And the game knew this. It would throw out animations that looked like other ones at first, but then would combo off into something else. And you would have to adjust as things moved along, especially on boss fights, or bigger enemies in general. The thing that I need to make clear, however, is a term that I've deemed the frustration factor. It's the limit in which a player's own resolve is willing to take negative and sometimes what seemingly is unfair consequences before they break. In a frustration factor that's high, a player will be willing to forgive and learn from their mistakes or the game's little quirks, but others may turn off the game or even adjust difficulty at lower frustration factors. And I think Silent Hill F is a prime example of where small, incremental decisions in design can lead to a vast difference in one player's experience from another, and they aren't things that are entirely clear on the surface, at least from the player's perspective. I want to give a couple of examples of this, and the first two deal with one signature weapon in the game, Hanako's Naginata. It's a long polearm-like weapon that has significant range, and you get the weapon in the second time or so in the Shadow World. It feels like an immediate upgrade over the knife you have at that point, but my first issue comes in where you get the Naginata and exactly when the next boss fight happens, because it's not that big of a time difference in game. I'd say about 10 to 20 minutes of gameplay when you first get the weapon and then the boss fight. See, up to that point, many of the weapons you have feel reasonably shorter range due to the length of the weapon, just visually. I mean, just look at the difference between these two. The Naginata feels like it should reach a lot farther, and it actually does reach reasonably farther. But here's the thing. Up to this point, you've already been trained in the sort of shorter combat area. You gotta get up and close and personal. So even if you play around with the range, with the limited enemies that are present from getting the Naginata to the boss fight, you may not understand the best way to fight with it going into a boss. A boss that is tailor-made around the range of the Naginata. No, seriously, the boss fight in question really punishes you for getting super close, or even close itself with the animations and the boss's range. The primary strategy is to be out of the range just enough, let them do an attack, and then charge in and get some hits with a focused strike or a combo from the Naginata. You can see the dilemma here. Now certain players may have experiences from games like Dark Souls or even Monster Hunter World who understand the differences here with the weapon's range and can adjust more on the fly. But others are going to feel like they aren't ready for the fight and will struggle to adjust, especially when the game just has you try again right away. It doesn't help that the boss is one of the prime examples of animation changes that I referred to turning into different attacks as well. And so a player who feels like they can't necessarily trust what they've learned up to this point may get to a point where they lower the difficulty or just don't play anymore. My question to the developers is simple here in terms of dealing with that frustration factor. Why not give another area or two just of story / more basic enemies that emphasize the range before forcing the player to fight that fight? Specific scenarios to emphasize what you want the player to learn about this weapon to deal with the boss, because this weapon is pretty essential going forward. Then there's the second part of the frustration with the Nagita when the game starts getting a little bit more claustrophobic with corridors. Obviously, it's a big weapon, and so in more tight corridors, you would think, well, maybe I would have problems with it, and you will. You will hit the Nagita against walls when trying to do more sweeping swings. Even when you're trying to do regular swings, it can end up hitting the walls. But the thing is, I would have expected that to happen a little bit more gradually. The first time you get the Nagita, it's in more areas where you have the open space. There aren't necessarily walls where you're dealing with these enemies. It's out in the open. Then, almost the next section, I believe, you start getting those enclosed spaces, and so now you're adjusting very quickly to the point where you're almost wondering if you should pull out the knife, when the Nagita is definitely presented as the better weapon. It's weird, and to be honest with you, I feel like there was a section of this game from a gameplay perspective that was cut that really would have helped in terms of this sort of gradual movement to it. While I do believe that part of horror is connected to the lack of full control to defend Hinako the way you want, frustration is the name of the game here when it comes to this gameplay with getting over the combat. Like, you can get caught on walls very easily in this section with these doorway pillars that just pop out just enough to get snagged on, which can be extremely annoying if you're trying to get away and get space. It's things like this that pop up here and there that from a objective element of just looking at the gameplay, it can be something that is a negative experience for a lot of people. And there's one example that I've seen used in other analysis that I need to specifically talk about here. This monster, the spawning monster. This monster is very unique compared to the other enemies in this game. When compared to them, this monster takes a lot more hits in my opinion, and in a good amount of scenarios, you can't just run past it. The area will actually be locked off. There's enough of them where you may get extremely annoyed when seeing it because you know, oh great, it's going to take another 5 minutes to get past this one thing if you don't die. It's so annoying, in fact, that I've seen several TikToks about people with the combat of this game, especially this one in particular, say it's not worth playing on hard mode. It's just play it on story mode, don't allow for the frustration to happen, and just, enjoy the story as is. And I understand it from a gameplay perspective. It's tedious, it's annoying, and frankly, it may not be fun. And I'm telling you that it's more connected and story-driven than people are giving it credit for. And actually, in my opinion, enhances the experience in certain ways, specifically with the feelings you get from the game. Now, I'm not saying that the opinions of others aren't justified in the gameplay section, but I don't think people are reading into how the gameplay itself enhances the story. Let me explain. If it isn't obvious, the spawning monster is a clear representation of pregnancy. I mean, it literally spawns monsters out of it by injecting it out of an orifice of the body. You can't get more spot on in terms of that. The thing is, pregnancy is one of the toughest and most drawn out experiences for a woman to undertake. I mean, it isn't supposed to be something that's short and sweet. It's drawn out. It puts the woman's body through hell in its transformation. It will literally last more than 9 months, well, 6 to 9 months depending on what's going on, without taking drastic actions like abortion. The thing is, it's supposed to be a fight, and that's the representation here. So having a fight that constantly comes up, that's drawn out over and over and over again, that seemingly puts the player in Hineko's shoes through the concept of that hell, what could that say about Hineko and her perception about it? What does it say about the fact that at times she seemingly can't escape the fate of it with it blocking off areas of escape, that she's locked in to deal with it? Is it weird that it seemingly felt like it took 20 or so hits to kill, specifically 22, and that the abortion limit in Japan is normally 22 weeks? And what does it say that the developers are forcing you to go through the same hell that Hineko is being put through? That to me, despite my hatred of fighting that monster and getting frustrated with how long it takes, when I started to think about it and the symbolism and the story, it started to make me really appreciate that bold decision. Of course, if you get too frustrated, you will never see that possible connection, so I understand the argument. But that's bold design in my opinion, and it was purposeful, and honestly, sort of brilliant. Now, many of you could be saying I'm looking way too far into it, and the fact is, I can't explain that for every decision that I find objectable in the combat of this game. For example, that fucking last boss fight. The nature of the one-hit attack during that boss, where every outward sign tells you to just unload on the boss. I mean, most of the time when an enemy charges up for an attack like that, you can do enough damage to interrupt it. Or, if you can't actually interrupt them, they usually are, well, unable to be damaged. But here, yeah, it took me a little bit to see, like, okay, I just have to run to the absolute other end of the actual battlefield. You couldn't go, like, 20 feet away or 30 feet away. You literally had to go across the room. No, that's just bad design in my opinion. It just wasn't clear, and to me, that's a problem. God, this review is a long one, isn't it? And now I'm just getting to the exploration and puzzle elements of this gameplay, because if I spend more time on the combat, this review will be 2 fucking hours, not just 1. Exploration in Silent Hill F is what I call a scarce, dense open world. Yes, I know those 2 adjectives sound like they contradict each other. Hear me out. When it comes to the actual area in the world, most areas are pretty confined, despite having several corridors and hallways that you can get easily lost in. In terms of space, it doesn't seem that big compared to other games in the series, like the Silent Hill 2 remake. But in that space, there's a lot of things usually, especially in areas like the town, the high school, and certain parts of the other world. A lot of things, but not a lot of interactables. The interactables, pickups, and lore that you can find are scattered throughout those areas. And even if you see certain reused assets, such as cabinets that you would expect an item in, that isn't a guarantee that they'll have something in them or not. Things tend to blend into the foreground, like a pipe that's leaning against a bench, for example, and so this tests your observational awareness to the extreme. Which for some is going to frustrate, because if you play on harder difficulties, you're going to need those resources, especially with the restrictions that will play into the second playthrough that I won't go specifically into. It doesn't help that coming across monsters that will give you problems is also a threat, and yes, you can run by them. In fact, running when you can in this game is probably the best strategy, because monsters do usually have a restricted area before they give up, and you have the speed to do it if you don't get caught on things or in corners. With that said, you can't do that if you're scanning the environment for everything, especially lore. And at the same time, those resources may not be worth it, as certain enemies seem to spawn on picking up particular items. Not lore items, mind you, those seem to be okay. But items that are recovery? Yeah, and sometimes it's definitely not worth the hassle. Again, it's all about managing the frustration here, but for those who are very interested in the game and will pick it up, I want to be very clear on something. And I won't be hesitant to say that this is a spoiler, but I don't think it's a spoiler worth keeping because I won't spoil specific story elements, but what you need to do. If you play this game on the New Game Plus, in this scenario, not the first, but the second playthrough, if you want the best ending, you really need to use a guide. I will say this again, if you want the best ending, you will really need to use a guide. With the density of this world and what it's needed to get the good and true endings, both of them, well, the good, quote unquote, and the true ending, you will want to read about that because you can screw yourself out of it very easily. And the game isn't going to stop you from doing that. In fact, I would consider this my biggest negative of the game in terms of the gameplay, beyond some of the whole format / structure of the combat. At least I have reasons that I could see in terms of the story that those existed. Here, not so much. It just feels arbitrary and like, oh, you can come across it if you try so many things, when in fact, it just feels like random chance. Finally, let's talk about the puzzles, because I think they are pretty damn good for the most part, and I actually wanted a couple more of them. When the puzzles really do make you think, like the numeric locks and trying to find out these combinations, you may have to bust out a pen and paper and start trying things to get these solutions. On hard, they are strong enough they will stop you and make you think about what you're looking at and will not hand you the answer with some, clue that, oh, just use this, but have enough logic behind them where when you do find the answer, you'll feel a little stupid because you missed what was in front of your face. This isn't early Silent Hill where you have a solution where an item being used makes no sense. These are reasonably put together, especially in visual elements of the puzzle, using the actual puzzle pieces themselves to try to figure them out. In fact, I would love to see a game just based off of this and this alone. I know that things like blueprints could be considered like that. Well, at least from what I hear about blueprints. I still need to play it. But I was impressed at this puzzle design, that it fit into the world and yet also felt a little bit different. Not entirely different, but a little bit different. Especially the charms one. The charms one, I just thought it was an interactable at first, but in fact, it was a puzzle down the line, and I should have known what was going on when enemies were showing up when I was making mistakes. I liked that there was consequences for my actions in terms of that, and there was a timer on it, quote unquote, but it wasn't obvious. It was like, oh, I should have figured this out earlier. I'll wrap up the gameplay section by saying, don't be afraid to fail here if you want to play this game. Don't be afraid to walk away if things aren't going well. In fact, one of the hardest bosses that I failed tens of times on stream on, I ended the stream, and the next day, with a fresh perspective, did it in one try. Didn't read anything, didn't do anything rather differently, just fresh perspective, being like, okay, how do I approach this? And it worked. The game is the ultimate frustration test. And while I think this is the rare scenario where dropping the difficulty and moving on would actually be a negative. At least to me. Finally, let's talk about the game's presentation a little bit. With the game moving to a more eastern location, with a 1960s aesthetic in a Japanese rural town, it's nice to see that the essence of Silent Hill is still here in spirit when looking at the game's visuals. Now, it helps that the locations chosen are actual locations within Japan, down to the staircases and even areas that you think would be adjusted for more gameplay purposes. No, this small gap here is there in the real world. It gives the game a sense of realism despite its obviously fantastical nature, and it's something that the series has always gotten right, even in its worst games. With that said, I do love the emphasis on the contrast between the obviously lived-in town versus the lack of humans present in the game. Seemingly small things like the wood piled up and leaning on the side of a house near a construction project seems simple on the surface, but it's the kind of small storytelling that presents the fact that those working on it probably disappeared suddenly, or they would have probably organized it and put it somewhere more out of the way. The texture use within the environment as well, especially within the spirit world and the more temple-like areas, it was amazing how much I could visualize the feel of things like the flooring just by looking at it. Which is saying something, because I didn't initially stream this on a big 4K TV or anything. It was just a 1080p monitor that has seen better days. The art direction is what drives this game, and quite frankly, I think people are overlooking how well this design goes in presenting itself to the horror aesthetic. Of course, it's the supernatural touches that makes it Silent Hill, and let's start with the monster design. With the game's themes in mind, the monsters do a good job of expressing the fears of Hinako and disgust, and keeping that in mind of how much that affects her, in my opinion. The Kashimashi, for example, is the figure of a female form, but obviously twisted and contorted, familiar and yet obviously hurting. The way it moves unnaturally and moves its head in particular can be the most unsettling thing about it, especially when it moves its eyes directly upon you, like it's judging you. However, there are elements of it that are sympathetic, that are obviously humanized to the point where you somewhat feel sorry for it. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got the spawning monster, which, let's be clear, is a little bit on the nose when it comes to the symbolism of pregnancy, the horrors of the body, and, well, motherhood in general. The cyst-like pustule elements combined with the representations of the breast of the female form can make anyone feel in the pit of their stomach just ugh, regardless of gender, by the way, even before seeing the excretion of the small creature every so often. It feels unnatural and almost an abomination against the world, doing a great job of putting Hinako's fears into light. It's almost like she'll be infected if she gets too close. And well, again, the game masterfully presents that in lockstep with the story. The shining cherry on top is the red flowers and fungal elements that seem to be a representation of corruption. How it's not present on everything, that there's definitely things untouched by it, But as you get bigger monsters and more dramatic reveals, it seems to be infecting everything left and right. Now, beyond the obvious symbolism in question, the red ends up really popping against the environment. But I also like how it doesn't stop with a bright red, but shades of red that really go deep into the character monster designs, especially of the bigger monsters. Go ahead, look at the big fat blob monster and see what you can see when you look close, especially in the stomach area. It's pretty impressive. Now, it's not all perfect, and the thing is, as you get more detail, things start to either impress or disappoint depending. For example, I know that I was a little disappointed with some of the secondary effects, like the shouting on the screen when an enemy does its screech, or things like the animation when you recover health with a healing item. It's then contrasted with the fact that there's some fantastic animation work right alongside it. Like Hideko, when she swings the pipe at an enemy, you feel it. You feel her anger and her force behind the attack and the force in which it hits. I also mentioned the movement of the enemies before, but that combination can lead to some legitimate moments of ooh and ah from the player. And that's exactly what you want in the presentation of a combat like this. Now, as for the voice acting, I really did appreciate the English voice acting here, which is what I used. Let's be clear. While all the performances in my mind of every actor was good, the shining stars here are Hinako and Foxmask. Hinako's voice actor's ability to really hit the range of emotion on her character, adding layers to her rage, and yet the ability to compose herself towards the mid and end game sold the convincing performance of the story. And yet it contrasted so well with the calm demeanor of the Foxmask's performance, which it had small breaks in his voice in appropriate places to emphasize some instability that the story called for. The thing is, one of the reasons why I'm willing to go on record saying that this is one of the best voice directions I've seen in a while for a game is that it can be very hard to get subtle elements that are subjective out of voice acting, at least in my opinion, and that goes double for horror games. Of course, there is times that the performance should be clear, like Rinko's jealousy in some of her lines. Those are clear and they should be because you want to present that. But when you're dealing with characters that can be interpreted in several ways without absolute knowledge, sometimes a voice performance can give it away in how it's presented, where the emotion comes out too strongly one way and gives away a plot element when you didn't really want it to at that point. The sign of a great voice director is someone who knows when to allow enough of it out so it gives a hint, but not enough where it makes it perfectly clear. So, Jamie Mortolero, who by the way did both directions on English and Japanese, needs to be given props for the masterclass presented here. Just take a listen and hear what I'm talking about.
Everything that's happening to us, do you think it could be some dream we're having? Because we just want to keep playing Space Wars together?
Well, we could pinch each other to find out.
No. I can pinch myself, thank you very much.
The door from earlier was for welcoming visitors. However, this door denies all but the select few who may tread sacred ground.
Am I allowed inside?
Why, of course. Today you are most welcome.
You're lying, aren't you, Shu?
Beats me.
You really think you can fool Hinako?
Hinako! You're late. I was worried about you.
He wasn't worried at all. He knew his dear partner would be all right. Oh yeah? Thanks.
As for sound design, this may be another area where the game absolutely shines. Obviously, there's a big range of sounds in this game, from the slight steps of a wooden floor that echo, the slide of a door that comes open in a nicely toned wave, and then immediately follow it with the screeching of a doll monster that spits out blood in a circle manner that it sounds like you can hear the fucking curves with the spitting of the blood, both forward and played backwards. I shit you not, I spent 5 minutes listening to that audio and going, what? How the fuck does it sound so good backwards as well? Like, I can't be more positive of how well the sound plays into the gameplay experience here. If you can, play with stereo headphones or a very good stereo sound system. It will incredibly enhance the experience. Hearing a monster with chains on its legs and the sound get closer and closer to you is unsettling in the right ways and is exactly what you want for a horror game. While I do have slight issues with the visual presentation, with certain corners being overlooked, I cannot say the same thing for the sound design. All over the place, it is fantastic. Just take a listen to some of the... and dead. Finally, let's talk about the music. The Japanese setting is apparent within the music with the use of flutes and what I believe is a shima-sen, or at least the music novice in me thinks it is. When I compare it to just a regular guitar, it sounds very different to me. It adds a level of authenticness into the experience that still feels Silent Hill in spirit, but obviously adds its own flair to it. But obviously the purpose of this music is to add suspense and heighten the game's emotions, and for the most part it does that pretty damn well. The use of Japanese taito drums in pieces such as Night Stained by Phantom Flowers adds a sense of foreboding, waiting for a horror to attack in almost a rhythmic movement of the monster's legs. Meanwhile, the tones used in pieces like A Murmur from Dim Lips just screams dread, very similar to other horror experiences, yet also really standing out thanks to feeling very matched to the environments that most of the songs are played in. Then there's of course the vocal work, which feels dipped into Japanese festivals and shrine performances, but adds a whole layer with the whole priestess element that is constant throughout the game, or at least the back half. It's fantastic all around, and take a listen, you'll hear what I'm talking about. For himself?
Shoo!
Would you like to buy some car insurance? Here, come out here, let's look at your car. You don't have a car, well I can sell you a car. Look, let's be clear. Silent Hill F is a wondrous experience from start to finish. There is no question that the game, in particular with its story, earns a spot in the echelon of some of the best games in the series. Despite it being in a new location with new characters only tangentially related to the mainline series, it's clear that the spirit of the franchise is alive and well, and quite frankly, it opens a door to really push the envelope of Silent Hill more than it has to up to this point. With that said, it's a game that can also really isolate a player with some of its features and designs, in particular with combat and level design, as well as some of the knowledge needed to truly appreciate the story. It's not bad in one area, mind you, but its weaknesses feel like a rash that can consume the player if they are not careful, to the point where they may give up or write the game off. Which makes the base objective score an interesting dilemma, wouldn't you say? Because it's definitely worth playing and it's solid all across the board, but is it worth absolutely dropping everything to play now? It's close to that line, and I think it's a solid buy of a game, but it just misses out on the must-buy right now territory due to that price tag and those annoyances I mentioned. It comes in at an 89 out of 100, making it a solid buy, unless you're hurting for cash. But that doesn't take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective element of games and tries to match a game to you. If you fall into one of the following categories on this screen, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see if the game lies in the buyability rating for you, after you see this screen as well. Yes, you're going to have to pause the video to see both screens for this, because, let's face it, there's a reason I covered this game. I do feel that despite the overall solid quality, the little quirks of this game will really drive certain people insane, while those same quirks may cause the person to play it to call it their favorite game of all time. There's a reason why the opinion is all over the place, and it is inherent to those little elements that I've talked about. And it's why this review is a little bit more in detail compared to other ones. There was just a lot happening here. Anyway, that's it for this review. If you like this video, hit that like button, and if you want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button. Now, coming up next, I will be going over what I plan to do with the channel over the next 6 months. It will be an update video, and I did mention that on the YouTube sort of chat page, but I wanted to get this review done because it's been a while since I had gotten a video done. But what I will say in this video right now, for those who are still listening, is that many of you know that my sort of go-to video is the overlooked games video of that year, and I usually get it done during the Steam Winter Sale. That will not happen this year. There is a reason for it, and I want to be clear about something. It's not because there aren't very many contenders. In fact, part of the reason is that there are too many contenders. There were a lot of games that I find interesting that I haven't had a chance to look at, and I think many of them are out there or different enough that I think I need to look at them before I do this video. And so, realizing the amount of time that it will take and what I need to look at, and the fact that my sort of method of doing this video has always irritated me a little bit, because obviously the November and December games would always sort of get the short end of the stick. I'm going to move it to the spring sale. I always do it during a sale so that people can pick up those games, but I will move it to then. And I hope people are okay with that. If you aren't, let me know. But I feel like that's the best for that video. I want the time to do it right. And let's be clear, things have been a little chaotic on the Joy Dragnix household over the last couple of months. House stuff, work is being, butts. But other than that, yeah. Anyway, if you want to discuss things, you can always join the Discord in the description below. And as always, keep on gaming.